Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Reveal Report on a Monday. We're back on Mondays. Thank you so much for joining us, and what a show we have for you this evening. If you're new and you're joining us, thank you. What do we discuss here? The paranormal, the occult, the esoteric. Of course, the main objective here is to warn you about the dangers of the occult, of dark magic. Speaking of which, that is the topic of tonight. Dark Magick Rituals performed by the Knights Templar. How did we get there? Well, as usual, I'm scrolling through my Instagram. I'm scrolling through videos. I'm doing searches about great topics, different things that we've done that we can discuss. And this gentleman, it came up, and he was doing an interview where he got into the Knights Templar. The knowledge that he shared was unbelievable. He's very well, obviously, read. He's done his research, educated. He's an author, and he's going to be joining us momentarily. His name is Tony McMahon. And for those that are watching and tuning in, keep in mind that this is a live show, and Tony is gracing us to come on board at 1 a.m. in the morning. He is in London. He is in the UK, and he stayed up for this. If we bring him back, which I'd love to have him back, and I hope you guys will show some love for him, we'll pre-record it and bring him again. But again, 1 a.m., so give him a little bit of leeway, ladies and gentlemen. He's had a very long day, and he'll be joining us momentarily. I want to do a special thank you to all the new subscribers. Guys, we're over 50,000 subscribers here on YouTube. People are fascinated about the esoteric, the supernatural, the occult, what it's all about. And new and younger generations are taking to understanding what it's all about. So thank you for joining us. Folks, a few people I'd like to thank and show some love and support is three beautiful women: Dolly D, Stephanie S, and Lisa M. Three amazing women who've decided that they wanted to send something my way on PayPal and said, hey, we know that you do this show on Patreon and that you were thinking about moving from YouTube. So we want to throw you something because we want you to share this information for everyone to see and keep it on YouTube. So these three wonderful women sent a little donation to PayPal and said, keep this on YouTube for all to see, share, and talk about. So again, please give them a thank you in the comments below. Dolly D, Stephanie S, Lisa M, God bless you. Thank you so much, ladies. And of course, there was a gentleman who this week sent something. I'm going to talk about him later on because, man, the guys are coming out. We've got such a support system from the women. And I thank all the beautiful, amazing, strong, powerful women out there. But now guys are coming on board. They're saying, hey, we got to support the Reveal Report. So I got a gentleman. I'm going to give him a shout out later on in the show. He sent something this way as well. And man, so blessed and thankful. All right, guys, without further ado, I want to bring my co-host, who's also an author and has discussed about the occult system, groups, and things they do behind the closed doors. Please welcome Miss Jessie Czebotar. Jessie, how are you? Welcome back.
Hey, doing well. Good to be back.
We took a week off.
We did.
All right. How you feeling?
I'm hanging in there, doing a lot better. So
okay.
Excited for our guest today. So
great. We're going to send our prayers, and we're going to move along. Guys, again, our guest is from the UK, or he's living there at this time. His name is Tony McMahon. He's written several books, one being the Knights Templar, and he posed a question. Did the Templars know they were going to be arrested? Interesting. We're going to get into that and much more. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host, Mr. Tony McMahon. Tony, welcome to the show.
Hi, hello, welcome from London. The middle of the night. It seems appropriate as well to be discussing the occult.
Yes, time of the, I love it. Tony, I'm going to begin. The Knights Templar, of course, have quite the reputation. They've done a lot, and there is a modern interpretation of who they are. They don't always get into the darker stuff, but there's a interpretation that you see on many TV shows, many history channels. Everyone always has a special about the Knights Templar. Let me play a quick snippet of a recent show about the Templars, and then we'll get into it. I want to get both your feedbacks, and we'll begin to break it down. Crank up your volumes. Take a look at this.
The Knights Templar, a holy order, God's personal militia. A society so secret that its true purpose is debated to this day. At first, glorified,
they would have been on a spiritual path.
And then accused.
Blasphemy, sodomy, and devil worship.
Just who were the Knights Templar? Heretics? A brotherhood of treasure hunters? Or, as books like the Da Vinci Code suggest, the keepers of sacred knowledge? The Knights themselves left many clues, passed down from generation to generation, hidden in ancient manuscripts, and scratched into the stone walls of their prisons. Secrets waiting to be deciphered by those adept enough to crack the Templar Code.
There was a lot packed into that quick clip. Da Vinci Code, codes written on walls, and so much more. Let me begin first with Jessie. Jessie, thoughts on what you saw and comments?
Yeah, I think that really summed it up well. You know, they're a group of secret organization, I would call it, you know, where they're going to be very multifaceted. And I think all of those things that it said are what they are. You know, you're going to have different knights who are involved in different things, keeping different secrets and keeping track of all of that stuff. So
excellent. Tony, I'll now hand over the microphone to you. Maybe dissect that clip a little bit, and then we begin to get into it.
I mean, I think the thing that's crazy about the Templars, you've got to remember, for 200 years, everybody was told these are the shock troops for Christ. You know, they're the front line fighting for Christ, fighting for Jesus Christ in the Holy Land, and by the way, in what's now Spain and Portugal, they were fighting there as well against the Saracens, the Muslim enemy. And then suddenly, that everybody's told, actually, you thought they were fighting for Christ. In fact, they're diabolists, they're Satanists, they're worshipping the head of Baphomet, some demon. They're spitting on the crucifix. They're engaging in these weird rituals behind closed doors. So everything was turned upside down, and they went from being the heroes of the Crusades to being a demonic force that had to be wiped out. And that's, I think, what really intrigues us about the Templars. Why did they go from being the good guys to the bad guys practically overnight? And we're still trying to really resolve that mystery today.
Very well said. All right. They had a trial. Let's begin with one of the questions you posed. They had a trial, and the trial kind of like exposed them for what they are. I'm sure there was torture involved in it. And the arrest of the Knights Templar happened on October 13th, 1307, I believe. Is that the correct date?
Yep, that is definitely the correct. So there were arrest warrants that were kind of drafted in secret a month before, and then they were served in a kind of, a dawn raid, if you want, on the Templar commanderies across France. It was in France, first of all, and they were rounded up in their hundreds, their thousands, and taken to prisons and interrogated and then put on trial. And those trials, by the way, went on for years. I mean, for 5 years, 1307 to 1312. And then 2 years later, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar was burned at the stake in front of Notre Dame Cathedral.
Oh, this is a lot. Like you've shared more in 1 minute with us than we've got in such a long period. I just want to ask you again to correct me if I was hearing you correct. Did you say hundreds of thousands or thousands?
No, thousands. It would have been thousands.
Thousands.
Thousands. Yeah. I mean, so the population was obviously much, but in terms of relative to the population today, it probably would have been a couple of 100,000 people. But obviously, the population was much smaller back then. But it's thousands of people, and it shocked the whole of Christendom. This sent shockwaves. People said, "Oh, this can't be true." The Knights Templar have always been these guys with the red cross on their chest, fighting for Christ, in battles. But there've always been people saying, especially in the church, saying all is not as it seems with these guys. In fact, very early on, there were monks. There was one monk called Isaac of Stella who said, "These guys have nothing to do with Christ." When did Christ ever say, pick up a sword and kill people? Yeah. So, they were accused of all sorts in their trials. As I said, they were accused of worshipping a demonic head called Baphomet.
Yes.
This head apparently spoke to them. It gave them orders. These are things that were said in the trials, that they then ritually spat and trod on the crucifix, and that they kissed each other inappropriately. It was even said on the base of the spine, make of that what you will. And all of this went on behind closed doors. And of course, there were Templars who then confessed. Torture was used in France, not in other countries, by the way, but in France. And sometimes they'd retract their confessions and then they'd confess again. And so the whole thing went on for years. But eventually, about 100 Templars were burned at the stake. And Jacques de Molay was led out, and he was the final one. And the order was crushed completely, totally and utterly crushed.
Now, I want to add to what you said and get your comments, and Jesse, yours as well, because this is a very interesting thing. The first thing is you mentioned the last master was de Molay. Is that correct?
Jacques de Molay, yeah.
De Molay. Okay. I'm not quite sure if the people watching are aware, but there is a secret group or a secret society catered to a younger generation called the de Molay group, or the de Molay Society. And in fact, one of its most famous members was Walt Disney.
That's right.
He attended this. He was part of it. It's a somewhat of a maybe training to start people, preparing them, whether they're to become Freemasons or so forth. Talk to us first about that, please.
And you know, well, what's interesting is there are different people who call themselves Knights Templar. So I was in Rome the other day in Italy, and I met a group of Templars who are Roman Catholic Templars, and they've actually been involved in guarding the holy doors on a couple of the basilicas in Rome, because it's a holy year at the moment. You know, it's a Jubilee year, they call it in Rome, and thousands of Catholics have gone to Rome to get to have their sins absolved. And the Templars who call themselves Roman Catholic Templars have been guarding the doors of two of the basilicas, and apparently some of them also provided security to Vice President J.D. Vance when he visited, to see Pope Francis. That's what they told me anyway, and they've got some photographs which seem to suggest that might be the truth. But then, get this, you've also got Templars today who are Freemasons, and the Catholic Templars and the Masonic Templars do not like each other, and they say, no, you're not real Templars, we're the real Templars. And then on top of that, you've got what are called Neo-Templars, who say they're the real Templars and the other two are lying. So you've got all these people claiming to be Templars today, and all pointing fingers and saying the others are lying and they are not truly Templars.
Now, that's interesting that you're saying that about these groups. So some feel that they're more powerful than the other. All right, that they're special. Now, from where I'm from, Tony and Jesse, you could comment on this. I'm going to give you a chance. The more powerful groups would be always based on bloodline. The blood or the seed that's carried on, if they could follow it, those people would have, reign or power or more authority because of the bloodline, because their ancestors were the original Knights Templar. I don't even know if they could trace that, if they could even find that, if that's even possible. But what would make, in your thought, one group more powerful than the other, please?
Well, I mean, so for example, there is a group that these people who call themselves Neo-Templars. They claim that 200 years ago, a secret document was found called the Larmenius Charter, and it showed, this is what they say, that Jacques de Molay had appointed secretly a successor, and that there continued to be Grand Masters in secret for centuries. And then eventually in the early 19th century, they came out into the open. A guy called Bernard Palaprat in France said he was the latest Grand Master. And these Neo-Templars today claim to be the successors of Palaprat, that they are a direct line back to the original Templars. There's other people who say, as you may know, popularized by Dan Brown, of course, that the Templars were set up by a secret organization to protect the bloodline of Christ. So this is where you get the theory that something called the Priory of Sion set up the Templars, and the Priory of Sion still exists. There's another theory that's kind of similar, that says there's a network of families that go right back to the priests of the High Temple in Jerusalem, and this network of secret families is called the Rex Deus, and that they were behind the Knights Templar, and they still exist. So there's different theories out there.
Wow. A lot of information to unpack. Jessie, let me give you a moment to comment on what you've heard so far. Your thoughts and comments, please.
Yeah, from my experience, it is passed down through successions usually. You can get individuals that are going to step in and, at some points they'll do battles kind of, between the different factions. And there are a lot of different factions, not only the Jesuit Catholic Church, but you also get those that are going to be considered, I guess what we would say, kind of your non-religious type, or more of your other religious type, like your Knights of Pythias. How I've seen it structured is that, you're going to have it break down within the quadrants, both internationally as well as in the United States. And within those quadrants, you're going to have, those that are the supreme preceptors, who are the leaders. They're going to oversee the preceptors, who are those overseeing the knights regionally. And then you'll have the knights underneath those preceptors. So, we're talking about a vast worldwide organization or system that, meet regularly. And you do have, some of them, they're going to compete. Others, they're going to pass down their lineages based on bloodlines within those quadrants or those regions.
Wow.
Yeah. I can tell you something quite interesting. When I had lunch with the Roman Catholic Knights Templar in Rome, and this was in July. Now, they told me, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you, but I'll tell you.
Please.
They told me that they have these regular prayer sessions where they form themselves in a church or an appropriate site into a military formation, and that they pray against Satanists and against Freemasons.
Really?
And they see themselves in a kind of prayer battle with Satanists and Freemasons. And they do this, I think I'm right in saying they do this at the equinoxes, because they think this is when the Satanists are particularly active, and they do it at Halloween and so on. So they pick certain times. And they said to me that at one of their prayer meetings, their cars were vandalized by Satanists, and that they were actually surrounded. So that I don't have evidence for that. That's what they told me had happened. So it's interesting that there are Templars who believe that they are actually locked in combat with Satanists and Freemasons.
Which, if this is to be true, then hats off to them, because that's a wonderful thing if they're working together in prayer. Do you know the chapter or can you not share what chapter that was? That's in battle.
So this is, if you look up Templars today, or just Roman Catholic Templars, you'll find these guys. They have chapters in the United States and in Italy. Actually, I think that's their two strongest, and then in other countries as well. Numerically, they're far weaker than the Masonic Templars, who they don't regard as being true Templars. But they are growing, and they do have deacons and officers in the United States. Yeah.
So is it the American Knights Templar? Would that be safe to say that's what they were known as, or is there a particular chapter? I'm just curious.
Yeah. The structure, I've got to admit, I can't see the structure, but the if you just look up, I think it's called Templars Today, you'll find their website, and they have they don't publicize their structure. Because obviously you've got to join to find out. They did try to recruit. I didn't join over lunch, but yeah.
Interesting. I wanted to touch back again on De Molay, because that was the main guy who they captured and I believe killed. And this is just something I pulled up. Take a look. Of course, this is one of their promotions.
Yeah.
De Molay, an organization for young men ages 12 to 21. So they begin to teach you the formats and structure of a secret society, how you conduct secrets, keep secrets, and how you take orders. Because initially, there's always people above you. You take those orders and so forth. Here is something they use today to show you the type of people. When they were younger, belonged to De Molay. Neil Armstrong, Terry Bradshaw, Walt Disney, Mark Calloway, who's known as the Undertaker. Interesting. So some very big names that were part of the De Molay group, and which they use today to get a youth behind them. But again, like you said, there are chapters, different groups. And when we go back to it, there's some dark past. I'm going to play one more clip and then get your comments on this clip. This is what they say the Knight Templars would do behind closed doors, apparently from the documents that they received during the trials. Here it is.
During the Templar trials, members of the order described how initiates were required to perform bizarre sexual rites, bestowing obscene kisses on the bodies of senior members. They confessed to spitting and trampling on the cross and denying the divinity of Jesus.
The accusations that have been leveled at the Templars are extremely lurid, and have always attracted, for that reason, a great deal of attention. But they are there in black and white in the trial depositions, so we have to address them and assess them.
But most shocking of all was the testimony that the Templars worshipped a sinister bearded head.
In the trials, the head was described in various different ways. Sometimes they said it had 2 heads. Sometimes brothers described it as having 4 feet. Some said it was made of silver. Some said it was made of gold.
It was rumored to be the preserved head of the first Templar Grand Master, Hugh de Payen. It was also described as a 2-faced skull or the head of an animal. Some mentioned a weird idol known as Baphomet.
I'll get Jessie first to comment on what you just saw, then I'll pass it to Tony. Well, what did you think of what they had to say, Jessie?
Yeah, I think, I think that's absolutely true, where you have these groups, they're going to gather together in secret. I think we're seeing a lot of the videos bringing out the cover lives, that on the one side, they portray themselves as Christians, as believers. On the other side, that's perfectly balanced with their worship of 2 other entities, including Baphomet. And some of the things that they're going to go through to be part of their circle groups, their secret groups, are going to include, their rituals to different entities. One of those being, the kissing of the back of the neck at the base of the spine there, which is a sign to them of death, of the gravedigger's spade. That's in Manly P. Hall's book, Initiates of the Flame. So they take that contract with death and enter into that contract. That's part of their brotherhood vows, where, they have to keep the code of silence and they have to keep the code of brotherhood, which means that, you love your brother as yourself, and it is your duty to cover your brother's sin. So that's all part of their ritual vows that they take to one another in those groups.
Thank you so much. Tony, your thoughts and comments on this video and what Jessie had to say, please.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the meat of what they were accused of during their trials. And it was all, in the warrants that were sent out for their arrest. It actually said that the Knights Templar had crucified Christ a second time. Was one of the phrases used. But yes, they were accused of worshipping this head. A lot of the confessions couldn't quite agree on what the head was. As it said in the film, some said it was the kind of decaying head of the first Grand Master, Hugh de Payen. That would have been from 200 years before. But the most intriguing description of the head was that it was this demon Baphomet. Now, the image that we all know of Baphomet today, this kind of goat's head with the the hands and so on, and the hooves, actually comes from the 19th century. It comes from a lot later. So Baphomet was some kind of demon anyway. That there we have it. The image there on the right was actually drawn by somebody in the 19th century, but it would have been something similar to the medieval period. It would have been one of the demons, in service of the devil. And these rituals were intended, as it were, to conjure up the demon, and the demon was then kind of guiding them and telling them what to do. I mean, I see a lot of similarities between what the Templars were accused of and what happens in the witch trials that started in Europe just 100 years later. You know, the idea of the osculum infamy, the kissing on the backside, where witches kiss the devil on the backside. You know, the desecration of crucifixes and of religious items, the worshipping of cats' heads, of course, and cats and so on by witches. There's a lot of parallels. And something very interesting, I should say, when the Templars were on trial, you should know that there were other people on trial as well for sorcery and for witchcraft, and that actually there was growing interest and growing concern by the church and also by monarchs in Europe about what they saw as the growth of sorcery, of necromancy, of witchcraft. And I think the Templars that should really, in a way, be seen in that context. And yes, there's a blog that I did on this, but yes, I do believe the Templars were, in effect, the first witches. It was the first witch trials, because after that we really see this explosion of witch hunting mania, which of course then eventually jumps the Atlantic to the Americas, and we have the Salem witch trials and so on 300 years later. But I think what the Templars were, they really were effectively being accused of witchcraft. And don't be put off by the idea because they were men. You know, men were also accused of being witches as well as women.
I'll share this story with you in regards to some of this particular stuff. There is a woman, and I cannot mention her name. This woman had I believe her videos have been scrubbed from the internet. This woman was dabbling at first in research with Ouija board, and was able to come across a particular design. The information was given to her through Ouija board, through a spirit, through the conjuring, that she created this special design of a Ouija board that I've not seen yet. And with this design, she was contacting these spirits, and they got into crazy questions, one being the Knights Templar. And they discussed how the Knights Templar were given, what am I looking for? They were given, I would say advice, but instruction on how to manipulate and control the masses through a banking system of borrowing and lending on their end, because we know that was before. But they had some type of a system that they would learn in order to control the masses with their coin, because they were very, very wealthy, which we didn't even touch on that yet, from gifts and so forth, taxes, whatever it was. I want to get into that next, by the way. And this woman talked about that, how these demons or this entity, whether it's Baphomet or not, gave them the information required to gain more power, which is interesting because if you go back to King Solomon, it is also said that through his rituals and summoning and controlling of these demons, it was the demons' information that gave him, that made him rich, that he found more gold. Or at least that's the tale that's told in those circles. These demons told them where to get the gold, how to find it, and so forth. And again, we so many stories about getting information and knowledge from these spiritual beings that now we hear from this woman. She claims that that's what was told to these Templars. It was a demon giving them information on the financial system with coin, borrowing, lending, controlling, and getting them into slavery. Let me get you first, Jessie, to comment on that. Then I'll pass it to Tony. Thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about that several other times, you know, how you do have the connection with Solomon and the using of these demons. Do they give secret information? Is that part of the draw in the secret knowledge for, you know, groups like the Templars or others? I think it is. And I think, you know, it's the power, the fame, the fortune, yet they're not all in it just for the money. I think for them, you know, what I would say is that it's more the they feel that there's a duty there. They're going to be in charge of guarding the secret things, the sacred things, as well as the values, the assets to those that they're working within their quadrants. So I think it's more about protecting the resources as a whole and the sacred items than just having knowledge of gold or having that for themselves. But yeah, it's interesting.
Tony, thoughts on what I said and what you know about the Knights Templar, and how, if you could share with the audience as well, they gained their wealth.
Yeah, I mean, the Templars were they were a money-making machine. I actually talked about, there's a kind of a chapter, I'll wave my book here as a good excuse.
Yes.
There's a chapter here in the book all about, because I actually began life myself as a financial journalist many years ago, and I was really fascinated about how they make their money. Now, of course, there's the surface story, which is that they set up these kind of farms basically all over Europe that were doing dairy farming and handicrafts and so on, that was making money that was then diverted to the Holy Land. But there was so much money, of course, that people began to say, well, it can't just be that. There must be other things that they're up to. They did get into kind of early forms of banking. They got into lending, which is unusual because the church actually prohibited Christians from lending. It was Jews that did money lending, but the Templars somehow got into it. But the scale of the wealth did make people ask questions about, well, how have they become so rich so quickly? Now, of course, if we go into other theories, we talk about them as the Templars. They're called the Templars because they were based on Temple Mount in Jerusalem. They were given what's now part of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, was actually they called it the Temple of Solomon. They believed that they were situated on top of the original Temple of Solomon, which of course had been destroyed first by the Babylonians and then by the Romans. So what you see today, of course, is just the foundation of what was once King Herod's second temple. So and you've got two Muslim buildings there, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So when the Crusaders were in control of Jerusalem, the Templars were given the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which they call the Temple of Solomon. And some people ask, well, were they digging down underneath the Temple Mount looking for long lost sacred treasure? For example, the Ark of the Covenant, which had been missing since the 500s BC when the Babylonians destroyed the first temple. Did they find the Holy Grail? Of course, is another accusation that's made. Did they find other sacred treasures that made them extremely rich? I met a group of people who believe they even at one point had the shroud of Jesus or even the head of John the Baptist. And these relics in the Middle Ages, had huge both sacred and financial value as well, because churches that own those relics got a lot of pilgrims, and a lot of pilgrims meant a lot of money. So had the Templars found something that they weren't cottoning on to people, that they weren't telling people that they had? The Holy Grail is the most obvious one, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, this is some wild stuff. I did not know that about the Temple Mount and the King Solomon's. This is, again, not everyone knows these type of details, so this is fantastic. Jessie, comments? You heard anything of this nature about that?
I haven't read anything of that, but I'm curious. Do you have that? Is that in some of your books, Tony? And which one is some of that information?
I mean, the fact the Templars were based on Temple, because it was the Order of the Temple, so that's why they're called the Templars. So I do talk about how they were given, basically the Crusader King of Jerusalem gave them permission to be based on Temple Mounts. Now, some people say, well, that was that part of their mission? They were determined to be based there because they knew there was something there, or was it just an accident that they were based there? The thing is, it's unlikely to have been an accident. The point is, the Temple Mount was an incredibly important spiritual place for Jews, for Christians, and for Muslims. The Temple Mount is where Abraham is supposed to have nearly sacrificed Isaac. That's what Jews believe. The Temple Mount is where Muslims believe Muhammad ascended to heaven. Everything happens on the Temple Mount. That's why it's fought over even today. And so the Templars were based on that platform, on that holy of holiest places where the temple once stood, hence why they're called the Templars. And did they find things underneath? Were they digging down into the foundations of the Temple of Solomon to find something? Oh, and by the way, of course, Freemasons also believe that the temple is extremely important. They have a whole secret ritual about the architect of the temple being allegedly murdered, Hiram Abif, as they call him. So it's an incredibly important place. Could it have been where the Templars found incredibly important treasure?
Tony, that is some incredible information that I've not heard before. And I love it. Thank you for bringing that to the forefront. And again, people who want to know more are going to be able to get Tony's book, of course. I have a link in the description to his website, and we'll give him a chance to give his details on how you can get more and hear more about it. Tony, this is amazing what you talked about. I want to get into a little bit of the ritual stuff because that's important to me, because it's horrid. And of course, in the description that I played earlier, they would spit on the cross, step on it. They would say vile things. That's number one. We're not going to get into anything else yet. We're going to, but what are your thoughts and comments? What did you come up with in all your reading and research about what they did?
Well, one of the excuses that was used at the time is they said, oh, well, we're spitting on the crucifix because this might happen if our Templar knights are captured. The Muslim enemy might spit on the crucifix, and so we've got to. So nobody really bought that argument. So the spitting on the crucifix was something that people 700-800 years ago would have regarded as appalling. I mean, this is a terrible, terrible thing to do. Remember as well, people who rejected the church, in the 1300s. You were arrested by the Inquisition, and if you didn't recant, you were burned at the stake, and you were not buried, and you went to hell. This is really serious stuff to be accused of spitting on the crucifix, to be accused of desecrating, the religious symbols of the church, and the church punished you with death. That was the consequence of doing this. There were a group of people during the Crusades in France called the Cathars, who were Christians who rejected the church and they rejected the sacraments. And the Pope actually launched a full-blown crusade against these Christians to wipe them out. And they were burned at the stake and everything. At the same time as they were fighting the Muslims in the East, they were fighting other Christians because they'd rejected the rights of the Roman Catholic Church. So what the Templars were doing, if they were spitting on the cross, this is something that was punished by death at the time. It was a heresy. It was rejecting Christ, and there was only one way that if you rejected Christ, there's only one way you were going, and that was straight to the stake to be burned. It was the worst thing you could do.
The worst thing you could do.
You were overturning the world. You were destroying the whole natural order, the balance of things, by doing something like that. Desecrating the cross, or desecrating the Eucharist host, or other attacking statues or whatever. These were appalling things to do.
Yeah. Jessie, thoughts on that, by the way?
Yeah, I think it's part of their beliefs and the blasphemies that they go through. And, I would kind of put it into two categories. You're going to have the stepping on the cross, the spitting, the blasphemies. For them, it's, there's a mix. It's not just Christianity, it's not just Bible. Every symbol represents so many layered different things, and one of those things that the cross represents is going to be the Kabbalah tree, which in that imagery, who's in that place between on the cross. It's a man, and that man is standing on a woman's head, that woman is standing upon Leviathan, and what is above it, it's the ascension. So for them, there has to be a stepping on the flesh, which they're going to put Christ in the flesh, not as, the only God or the only name above every other name. It's their way of treading on that ground so that, God will give it to them, and they believe through that they can obtain their own godhood or ascension. So, it's very symbolic. It's both representing, their outright rejection of Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, but also representing that they're stepping into that place of ascending as their own God.
It's very interesting as well. I noticed there, of course, in that image, you've got the pentagram, and it is interesting. You see the pentagram, the five-pointed star, there in the bottom right-hand corner. You actually see that in churches associated with the Templars. So in Tomar in Portugal, which still there's a church there where the Portuguese Grand Masters are buried. You see this window with the pentagram. Now, I think a lot of people see that and they go, well, what on earth is that doing in a church? Now, the excuse given for that, by the way, is that each point of that pentagram represents the 5 wounds of Christ, and it is a Christian symbol. That's what the Templars said in their defense. But you do see the pentagram popping up, and it does kind of unnerve people when they see that in Templar churches.
Yeah, and that goes back again to the Kabbalah, because in their imagery of the tree of life, you have 2 parts. You have the tree of life above ground, and then you have the part that is the opposite, the mirror image below ground. The above ground is recognized by certain symbols. You'll have the stars, the moon, and then below ground, you'll have that pentagram representing really the Hippoth, or Hiphoth, which is the tree of death. So wherever you see that pentagram, it tells you that they get into the dark Kabbalah magic, versus if you don't see it, that means they practice only the light side Kabbalah magic.
And one thing on the Holy Grail, we assume that it's a cup, or if you've read Dan Brown, you might think it's a bloodline. But actually, another interpretation of the Holy Grail in the Middle Ages, which actually pops up in one of the King Arthur romances, is that the Holy Grail was actually a gem, possibly an emerald, that popped out of the crown of Lucifer when he was cast out of heaven by God, and it was called the lapis exilis. And that was what the Holy Grail was, which had enormous power, of course, because it had come from the crown of Lucifer himself. And of course, this led some people to say that the Templars were Luciferians. And in fact, some Nazis believed that the Templars were Luciferians and that they were fighting the church as agents of Lucifer. In fact, there was a Nazi called Otto Rahn, who was an archaeologist and a Nazi, who went on a kind of a Grail quest to find what he believed the Templars had, the Grail, and he went on this quest to find the Templar Grail. Went all over Europe and up to Iceland, didn't find it, and in the end was found mysteriously dead on an alpine mountainside. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that the Grail may have actually been something that was owned by Lucifer, part of his crown.
That's another incredible piece of information we've never heard on this show with all our guests, and you, and I thank you for that. I mean, Tony, you're coming out and you're swinging home runs. I appreciate that. Don't stop now, please. We got about 50 minutes left. I want to get into 2 other things here before we sign off. Again, just to finish up on the rituals, and the rituals got darker. Of course, they would bow and kneel and kiss the behind of the master, and there was sodomy and some sexuality and a few other things. I want to touch on that and see if you could, maybe touch a little bit more on that, because people are fascinated, because that has kind of come across into today's day and age in some cults we've heard of. That is now blended into some groups that actually still do some of those things. So if you don't mind, please, share with us what you've heard about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, sodomy. By the way, sodomy was a kind of a big umbrella term that covered all kinds of non-reproductive sex. But be in no doubt that male-on-male intercourse was understood in the Middle Ages, and the Templars were being accused essentially of that. I mean, there's one description that one Templar knight gave, that he said he was brought into a room during his initiation ceremony, and the master was lying on a table entirely naked, and he was told then to go and cover the master's body with kisses, basically. And so this is actually said in the trial. But the thing about sodomy, again, to the medieval mind, this was another thing where you were overturning the law of God, basically. So to combine sodomy with heresy, with devil worship, this was a really toxic brew, and it left the Templars really very little room to defend themselves, because, as people confessed to these things, the public and public opinion said, well, can't really defend these guys because they've breached just about every divine law going. But sodomy was something very, very, it was seen as unbalancing the God's world, God's creation, and it was and obviously punishable by death.
Yeah. Again, it's unbelievable, these things that they've committed in these rituals of the sodomy. Again, that's a lot of that. Sometimes we see in different groups with sex magic and the manifestation of sex magic. So it's out there, and it's almost like the more outlawed it is, the more they believe there's power in it. It's wild what lengths they'll go. Obviously, now there's rituals with sacrifice. Was there any documentation or anything whatsoever that came out about them making any type of a sacrifice to their ancient god or entity?
There were stories. There was one knight actually who he tried to retract his confession, and the Inquisition showed that in an earlier confession he'd said that that women were actually recruited to the Templars and then raped and possibly murdered. There were accusations made a lot later that the Templars killed babies, burned them, ground them into dust, and drank them in some sort of potion. And that was made sometime after the Templars were crushed. But undoubtedly, people would have believed that these initiation rituals, child sacrifice, for example, is a very ancient taboo. And if you were going to accuse the Templars of anything, then the sacrifice of children, was going to be up there. So certainly this idea that people would have disappeared into the commanders and were never seen again, is something that was raised in the trials.
Wow. Jessie, would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, I think, I would say it's all encompassing, both the intense sexual sins are something that they're going to engage in monthly. That is, you can see that on the open scroll calendar, satanic holidays, where, they have their regular grand high climax every month. And part of that is going to engage the sexual sex magic. And you'll see that they'll call it the satanic revels. And when you see demonic revels, that's not just sex with one another. That's going to include, sex with the bestiality as well as sex with demons. So in that, why do they do it? It's all about the access into other dimensions. They can't enter through Thanksgiving, which is what Scripture tells us. So they're going to enter in the next closest frequency to Thanksgiving is going to be ecstasy. So that's part of why they engage in that. And you see the symbology. Manly P. Hall addresses that in the Initiates of the Flame. You see the star, the 5-pointed star, which to them represents that bond, that marriage of the Lamb, is what they're going to call it. And that's, it's part of their brotherhood vows to one another. It's part of their duty to love each other. And it's not about the lust. It's not about the homosexuality. It's about their vows of brotherhood and, represents so much more to them. So.
Dark.
And I think, I was going to say, I think there was always a fear, again, because, You got to remember, not everybody in Europe had still in the 1300s. Not everybody in Europe had been converted to Christianity. There were still pockets of paganism, and one of the things that the Christian Church had always feared with paganism was, as you were saying, the use of sexual magic, the use of sex rites, the idea of sex, allowing you to transition to another realm, behind the curtain, that you through sexual ecstasy, you would kind of achieve some kind of enlightenment. Obviously in some of the pagan temples, there were even kind of prostitutes, basically, who, who assisted in this kind of sex magic. And this is something Christianity never liked and prohibited, which is, why we don't have orgies in churches, but they did have them in pagan temples.
Wow. Guys, finally, I want to touch on this because it's important, and that is their logo. If you look at it, it's not quite a cross. It's not really a cross where one side is bigger than the other, but it's on all their gear when they went to war. Some of it might be on their shields, it might be on their robes, it might be on their capes, on their hats. It's a crest, and we're seeing it more and more today. Believe it or not, today it seems to be coming up. It's everywhere. So I want to touch first on that and get your take. Jessie, your take on this type of cross and its meaning, and how it's being used today. It's everywhere.
Yeah. So it's pretty extensive. Each of the different night circle groups are known by their crosses. So you'll see different, like the ones we see for the main Templars, which are going to fall under kind of your progression, starting with, the Knights of St. John, the Knights of Malta. Theirs is going to be, kind of what I call that equal, you've got the equal straight line, vertically, equal line horizontally. And for them, what that middle line of the cross represents, that's vertical, that represents the base Solomonic contract with entities, those entities being Abaddon, Ashtaroth, and Leviathan. The cross line represents a contract that they have with Ashtaroth. Now, if that cross line is up higher on that main line, that represents an additional contract with Samael. If it's down low, like your satanic cross, it represents that they have an additional contract with Asmodai or Asmodeus. So they use the cross to represent their contracts in the spirit world with different entities. So you can know which, night groups they are. You can know the progression that they're going to follow in their degrees based on the crosses, and can know like what their connections are, both in the Brotherhood as well as in the sovereign military, by the crosses that they identify themselves with.
Excellent. Tony, if you could touch on it and your thoughts on some of their crosses and what it means in the research that you've come across, please.
Yeah, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner where it says Christ, that is in Portugal, the Templars were turned into, they didn't crush the Templars, they kind of turned them into another organization called the Order of Christ. And interestingly, they changed the cross. And if you can see there, they kind of hollowed it out. So that's in the bottom right-hand corner. The Order of Christ is basically the Templars in disguise. Now, what the significance of that is, I've got a bit, that's a weakness of mine on symbology, but I don't know why they did that, but it's a mixture of two types of cross, the quapate and another type of cross. But you're right that it's not really a crucifix, sometimes called a Greek cross, but the bars, of course, are of equal length, but it's not, as you say, strictly speaking, a crucifix. So what does it mean? And I defer, I think, to Jessie on that. I think her description there was very good, was spot on. The official line was that the white mantle was intended to show the whiteness of martyrdom, and the cross was intended to reference the crucifixion. But it is a strange cross. It's a very distinctive cross, but it's not a crucifix. Let's be clear about that. It's something else.
Correct. Again, there's so much to the Knights Templar, and we could do a show here for a couple hours, but we're not going to. Following this tonight, we're going to be doing an after show, a Q&A on my Patreon, where you'll be able to come on and ask a few questions. Jess will be there, myself, and it's up to Tony if he'd like to join, and if not, the invitation is there for him to return next month and talk a little bit more whenever he's ready. But we are going to be doing an after show following this on Patreon. You could join in, and the link is in my description. Click on it, become a member of Patreon, and be a part of this roundtable Q&A. Coming up next. On that note, I want to thank you both for being here. It's been an incredible show, very informative. Tony, you brought some great information. And Jessie, you talked about things you've never, ever discussed on this show. So we thank you for that. Jessie, first and foremost, how can people follow and support your ministry?
Yeah, you can follow and support me on kingdomlivingwithjessie.com, and you can get access to my courses, my books, and my series about the Sovereign Military Order on that website as well.
Excellent. Tony, how can people support you and purchase your book?
Well, I beg you all, as I'm an author, what do authors do? They want you to buy their book. But this is the first in the 3 books that basically I'm bringing out. The second one, which I think you guys are going to love. It's called Downfall of the Templars. It will be out in November, and that's called Downfall of the Templars, Guilty of Diabolic Magic, ? And that's going to be all about a lot of what we discussed in the trial and whether or not it was related to witchcraft. And then the third book, which will be out at the end of next year, is called The Knights Templar and Freemasonry. Guess what that's about? Oh. It's about the Knights Templar and Freemason claims that they are the the descendants of the Templars, and I look at that claim in some detail. Very interesting stories there, whether you agree with it or not.
Incredible. Now, you're going to have to come back in November. Of course, you're going to have to come back in November when your book is out to talk a little bit about it and prep everybody for it, because that's important. So we thank you for that. His link is also in the description below, guys. His website, so is Jessie's. On my end, guys, listen, I got to thank you all for watching. It's incredible. And a few people I got to do a shout out for because, man, it's amazing. It's amazing what's going on here, guys. So Vincent C. this week reached out to me. He loves our content. His name is Vincent, and a few times he really wanted to show us support. So Vincent sent something special, a little gift on PayPal, and said, "I love what you do. Keep it going." So Vincent C., thank you. Please thank Vincent in the comments below. Very, very important because I didn't give him a shout out earlier. But Vincent C., and of course, Dolly D., Stephanie S., Lisa M., Vincent C., all 4 of them, show them some love, some gratitude, give them a thanks, because without them, we would keep this exclusively on Patreon. On that note, we're going to go over to Patreon for the after show. I want to thank you all for being here on behalf of Tony, my guest. Thank you so much. And Jessie, we thank you all for watching. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you next week, Monday, as we return with another show. Right after this, we're going to Patreon for the after show. So thank you for watching. God bless. Good night, everyone.